right, so we have the next presentation will be another slice of bounty in our bay, and we'll have a tag team with Larry Oda and Tim Thomas. So please come forward.
I think it's supposed to be me first, then Larry.
Okay, okay. Okay, come on up then, Tim Thomas first. Make sure to turn this on, and here's a clicker if you need that.
So thank you for being here today. I have to apologize a little bit. I'm not a very technical person. You know, I don't even drive a car. And I put this program together on a PowerPoint, and what I didn't know, because I have a new program on my computer, for some reason they want to take the PowerPoint and they turn it into some other kind of thing, and you have to be on internet, and I brought it in. And so when I brought the thumb drive over here, it wouldn't work. So I had to run back to get my computer. Look, it worked. So a little about me. My name is Tim Thomas, and I am a fisheries historian, and I have researched the human use of this bay for well over 30 years. I was the historian and curator for the Monterey Maritime Museum for many years, and have written a couple books about the Monterey waterfront and fishing history here. And I have the sort of dubious task of the first part of this program to talk a little about the native people of Monterey and the Chinese community in Monterey. I'm not representing those cultures, but I'm going to talk a little about their fishing, about the importance of them and the Monterey Bay. So, how do I work this? Which one do I push? So we could trace the native culture into the Monterey area about 10,000 years. And I like to say that they were the first commercial fishermen in Monterey. And I use that term because it's truly how they made their living. If you think about what Monterey may have looked like 1,000 years ago, or even just 500 years ago, it was a land, lots of lakes, lots of fresh water, at least enough to sustain not population, because it was never that big. Huge herds of deer and elk and tule elk and grizzly bear. I have read accounts of early explorers come into the Monterey area, especially in the fall months, talking about bird life. So many birds, they said, you couldn't see the surface of the lakes. Said the ducks would darken the sky. Look onto that bay out there. It'd be so filled with seals and sea lions and stellar sea lions and sea otters. They actually thought the bay was paved. They wrote into their diaries that the Monterey Bay is like a brown cobblestone. Certain times of the year, waves would crash up onto the beach, pouring fish onto the beach. That's how abundant it was out there, which tells me there was never any real time of hunger for the Rumsian people. And they go out to the bay, and these beautiful boats made out of tule, and tule, those big tall grasses, those reeds that grow along the wetlands, and they'll fish everything that's out there. They'll make beautiful fish hooks out of abalone or mussel shell, make the fishing line out of a stinging nettle plant, use traps, baskets, spears, nets. And what I personally think is the absolutely coolest thing in the entire world is they were the first divers going into that bay. I mean, Monterey Bay today is the dive capital of the world, am I right? And we take a walk along the waterfront, especially on the weekend, down there by the Coast Guard Pier, that place will be filled with rubber people. But the Rumsian were the first divers going into that bay. And we know that because of burials that come out of the ground in recent years. And you cannot build a house along the Monterey waterfront without running across a Rumsian burial or two. The males have what's known as surfer's ear, which is a little bony growth that goes over the opening of your ear if you're staying a lot of time in the cold water like the Monterey Bay, which makes a lot of sense, don't you think? You see an abalone this big, you're going to dive down there and get it. And abalone played a very important part of their life. They ate it. They used the shells to make tools like fish hooks and shovels and bowls. They used the shells to decorate baskets, to make jewelry. And they traded it to other California Indians for things they could not get here in Monterey, like obsidian, which is a volcanic rock, which they're using to make arrow points and spear points. Perhaps some of you have seen that old Kevin Costner movie called Dances with Wolves. Anybody remember that movie? Yeah. That is about Indians in South Dakota. If you watch that film closely, and it comes on cable TV all the time, you'll notice there's a lot of abalone in the clothing and the regalia that they're wearing. Well, as far as I know, there is no abalone in South Dakota. It's got to get there some way, right? It's going on these trade routes. A lot of it, most of it, starts right here in Monterey. Monterey literally was the abalone capital of the world at one point. And they have found California, probably from Monterey, red abalone in midden sites as far back as Minnesota. So this is my friend Linda Yamane in the Thule boat. Linda is a Rumsian descendant and probably the world's leading scholar on the Rumsian people. She has spent the last 30 years researching this culture, her culture, and bringing back language, songs, stories. And she makes Thule boats. This is actually at the aquarium in their tide pool. They did a program called Turning the Tide. I was actually a historical consultant for that program, and I brought Linda in to be part of it. And they haven't done it because of COVID, but I hope they'll bring it back some point. So here's a wonderful photograph or drawing of a Rumsian woman. This was done by an unknown Spanish artist in the 1790s. And what I love about this drawing is it really does show you their connection to the bay here. So the inner skirt would be made of tules. The outer skirt is deer hide. These black spots you see here would be abalone pendants. The cape that she's wearing is probably sea otter pelt. The necklace that she's wearing is olivella shell, little sea snails. Then her earpieces here. Let's take a look at a close-up. This is what she's wearing in her ear, right, is this piece right here. So I took this photograph a few years ago at the British Museum in London. This piece was collected here in Monterey in the 1790s by a pretty well-known British explorer named George Vancouver. Now you can see it's partly woven like a basket. In fact, at one point there are acorn woodpecker feathers in the weave there. The large white beads are clamshell disc beads. Little white beads are olivella shell bead. There's glass trade beads, abalone pendants. And then this long piece is bird bone. Bird bone is hollow. Then they create this design that we would today call scrimshaw, and they'll use squid ink to get that dark color. Then she'll wear it in her ear like you keep a pencil back behind your ear there. And so, let's see, I'll go backwards here. Yeah, so you can see she'd wear them as a pair right there. And then oftentimes as they weave these beautiful baskets, they'll weave into the basket, beautiful abalone pendants, clamshell disc beads, olivella shell bead. So the bay, very important to the Rumsian people. So this area where we are today, right here, Heritage Harbor, this whole wharf area is very, very important to the Rumsian people. It wasn't a village site per se, but what it was kind of a fishing camp was here at this very site. And as you go further up from here all the way up to the lower Presidio, you look at the ground, you can see how dark it is. Anybody's been out to Point Lobos, see how black that dirt is, or walk along the waterfront in Pacific Grove, you'll see the same thing, and it's littered abalone shell, right? This is what's known as the abalone pavement. This shows us human use this land here for thousands of years, all right here. So this is also up on the lower Presidio again to show you. This is, of course, part of a mortar system here. This is right on the fence line, right above the tunnel. This is probably one that one time were probably many there, and most of them were probably removed over the years. And of course, we associate these things with acorn. I don't think this was probably used for acorn, although there was probably a lot of oak trees up there. Acorn was a part of California Indian diet, was certainly a part of the diet of the Rumsian people here, but not so much as other parts of California because they ate acorn for the protein. They got their protein from other things. They would probably use this a lot for shellfish and other kinds of things to pound in there. All right. So again, there's my good friend Linda Yamane and her regalia, all of her abalone regalia on the Del Monte Beach right there. This is a wonderful picture you see right there. And then that's a beautiful necklace, abalone necklace with olivella shell beads here that she made for a museum actually in Japan. That's where that is today. And that's one of Linda's baskets that she made. Again, you can see the olivella shell bead, abalone pendants, and then the red feathers would historically be acorn woodpecker feathers in there, but because of various laws, it's very difficult for her to get acorn woodpecker feathers. Plus, it would have taken hundreds of acorn woodpeckers to give up their lives to get all those red feathers. So she actually had to use chicken feathers that she had to cut, and then spent days and weeks actually to find the right color dye to get that right red color. So I believe this basket is actually at the Oakland Museum today, where you can see it there, and she has another one in the museum in San Francisco right there. I'm going to also talk about the Chinese. This is another wonderful photograph taken in 1874. This is at the Chinese fishing village in Pacific Grove, Hopkins Marine Station, Monterey Bay Aquarium site. Chinese fishermen. Chinese arrived here in the early 1850s. They sailed across the North Pacific in 3 small 30-foot junks, actually a series of currents will push them all the way across. The Chinese called that the black tide or the big drain. Comes out somewhere near Cape Mendocino, Northern California, turned right, set on the California coast, actually overshot Monterey, ended up in Mexico, had turned around and fight these currents back when they finally landed out at Point Lobos. And you've all been out to Point Lobos, right? So you all know that Point Lobos is the center of the universe, where they were taken in by a Rumsian village that was out there that nursed them back to health. When they got healthy, they looked onto that bay out there and they said, hey, nobody's fishing out there. And the reason nobody was fishing out there, because at that time there was no way to get fresh fish to the big markets like San Francisco, because the railroad hadn't arrived here yet. The Chinese, and this is really a really big deal, understood the technology of drying all of their catch. And they'd dry all of their fish. Then once a month or so, this big Chinese junk would come down from San Francisco and pick up all this dried fish. They'd ship it back to China. They were shipping to other Chinese camps along the West Coast here, but they were also selling fresh fish to the local citizens here in Monterey. So they actually brought an economy here. The next year, around 1852 or so, another wave of them came, and they settled right here on this site, eventually becoming the largest Chinese fishing village on the West Coast. So if you look at this photograph, as I mentioned, it was taken in 1874. What do you notice in this photograph right here? Are these children, right? These children were born here. American citizens. They brought their families with them. All the other Chinese coming to California in the mid-19th century were mostly single men, coming to work in the railroads, coming to work at the gold fields. These guys came here to fish, and they came here like they knew what was here. There are historians that I know who believe the Chinese are in California as far back as the 5th century. They certainly had the ships, they had the technology, they had the skills, so they could have been. We just don't know, and probably will never know that for sure. This is another wonderful picture inside the Pacific Grove village. You can see the guys getting their boat prepared to go out. So they went out, they fished everything that was out there. There was no real, early on, there was no real competition for them when they were out there fishing in the Monterey Bay. Another great picture. Let's see if I can do this correctly. I can look in my pocket here. So this key, can you all see that? This key, this very key that I'm holding right here, this key changed the history of Monterey forever. This is a switch lock key from the Southern Pacific Railroad. This is the key that opened the lock, that pushed the track, that brought the train to Monterey. So now the railroad arrived here in 1874. You got a railroad, now you got to get fresh fish to big markets like San Francisco. Now you got other folks coming to fish in Monterey, in particular the Italians, not the Sicilians yet, but the Genovese coming across the bay from Santa Cruz, coming down from San Francisco to fish primarily for rockfish. So the Chinese wanted to compete with these guys. Said, hey, we'll just fish for squid at night, because nobody wanted squid then. Squid was considered to be a junk fish. The Chinese had learned years before that squid are nocturnal. You burn a little pitchfork over the side of your boat, it just attracts them to the surface. You scoop up in these big baskets, and they'll bring them on the beach to dry. So this wonderful photograph shows one of their fire baskets here on the boat that they would use to burn to attract the squid. So while the Italians are home sleeping, the Chinese are out fishing for squid. So here's again a picture of the village. You can see how they sort of built these little villages right over the rocks here. By the way, the name of this village is Point Abalone. And if you look at a 19th century map of Monterey, Point Abalone is right where the deck of the Monterey Bay Aquarium is today. So this is another Chinese fisherman. He is collecting kelp. That's what he's doing here and putting in the basket. And they would dry the kelp and then ship it back to China. I have been told that the Monterey kelp, it was particularly prized for the flavor of soup that it made. I have tried it. It is an acquired taste. Here they are, drying squid. This is right at the village in Pacific Grove. It's probably closer to where the Andronica Market is. That's where they are doing that. So around the turn of the 20th century, the city of Monterey banned the drying of squid within the city limits. And if you ever smell dried squid, you actually would understand why they did that. And so they moved all the squid drying grounds out along the Salinas Highway, these big fields across from the Monterey Airport that we now call Tarpey Flats. There are 3 large Chinese squid drying grounds out there at that time. This is another site inside the village there, and all kinds of things. But actually, this particular village was really a family-oriented village. So a lot of families lived there. There were not opium dens in this village or anything like that. We tend to think of that kind of thing. That did not exist here. They were very family-oriented. Early on, when Japanese fishermen began arriving in Monterey after 1895, many of them actually lived in this village with the Chinese fishermen there. So this is a photograph taken in 1945, but this is, of course, the Wing Chong Market. Wing Chong Market was opened by a guy named Wan Yi. Wan Yi was a Chinese immigrant who came to Monterey in 1918, opened a little general store across the street from today's Monterey Bay Aquarium. Wing Chong loosely translates to mean beautiful, prosperous, and you name it, he sold in that store, including rubber boots and rubber aprons, catered mainly to the cannery workers. He also had a rooming house upstairs, also catered to many of those cannery workers. And he does pretty good in this business, but he really makes his big money in the squid business. And so he would buy the squid from the fishermen, and then he would truck it out to his grounds out on the Salinas Highway out there. And for 25 cents, if he needed a job, you go to work for Wan Yi, he'll pay you 25 cents an hour to rake up squid in big piles like this one right here. This is all dried squid here. People used to refer to them as Squid Mountain, also known as Heliotrope Hill because of the purple color in it, also known as Halitosis Hill because of the smell of the dried squid. And then he had a secret process to get the dirt off it, because it was kind of a secret thing. And so you'll see this conveyor belt contraption here, and there's a tarp on the ground here. There's a hose right here. And so he'd run the conveyor belt thing one by one by one. As it drops off towards the tarp, the hose is blowing air to blow the dirt off that squid. And then you can see guys back here are raking up squid back there. And what he was doing with it, in those days, they'd punch it down in these machines into burlap sacks, because in those days, the shipping companies weren't charging by weight, but by volume. And then they were shipping it to Asia. It was going to Hong Kong, it was going to China, it was going to Japan. And to give you an idea of how well he was doing in that business, in 1930, during the Depression, Wan Yi was making well over $30,000 a year in the dried squid business. So and the name of that dried squid business was Wing Chong. So it definitely was beautiful, prosperous for Mr. Yi. So besides the squid business, the little store, he also helped other Chinese immigrants in the area. This is a paycheck for a Chinese worker at the Hoden Cannery from 1932. Look, he made $7.04. That's a weekly paycheck, right? That's what he was getting there. So here, take a look. So this is the backside of the check. So he took it to the Wing Chong Market, where he cashed that check. So that's the kind of stuff that Wan Yi would do for all kinds of people. All right. So that's a wonderful illustration done by a modern artist named August Gay of the Chinese Fishing Village. I think that's a beautiful piece of art right there. Of course, I won't go into the whole history of the village there. We all know the tragic ending of that village. Of course, they had a really good lease on that property, and they leased the property initially from David Jacks. David Jacks sold the property to the Pacific Improvement Company, which was then the land arm of the Southern Pacific Railroad. They owned thousands of acres of the Monterey Peninsula at that point. And around the turn of the century, the Pacific Improvement Company wanted to build fancy mansions out there, and they wanted to put a bathhouse, a swimming pool out on that property out there. But they had a really good lease, and so they weren't going. And then they offered them property, the Pacific Improvement Company offered them property at Asilomar, and they offered them property over where the Monterey Beach Hotel is. So you guys can have that property. I said, no, why should we leave? We've been here for 50 years. They weren't going. Then in April of 1906, there was a massive earthquake and fire in San Francisco that displaced everybody that lived there, including the Chinese community. Where are they going to go? they came here to the village in Pacific Road because they had family that lived in that village. So now they're not only not leaving that village is getting bigger. So almost a month the day of the earthquake, there was a fire in the village. Didn't burn all to the ground, but it did burn a good portion of it to the ground. Nobody died in that fire, but they got the message. It still took a year to get them off the property, and when they did, a small group of them moved down to McAfee Beach, where they built another family-style village there, and they were there into the 1920s. A lot of them left and went into San Francisco and other places like that. I thought I did. So, Larry, you want to come up here now? This is a wonderful photograph of a Japanese fisherman on his brand new salmon boat. This is the Monterey Boat Works, about 1910. I actually love this photograph. Japanese flag, American flag, right there. One thing you see, Japanese immigrants, you always see the American flag at any kind of event when they do this kind of thing. It's just a beautiful photograph. You know, we think about, and Bobby gave this wonderful presentation on Sicilian fishermen and the starting fishery here in Monterey, but it really was abalone and salmon that starts it all. And it was Japanese fishermen that are doing that. And it was really salmon that brought the Japanese to Monterey along with the abalone. And to give you an idea of how big that fishery was, about the year this picture was taken, and at the end of the 1909 salmon season, and the salmon season lasted 3 months, May 15th to August 15th, the Monterey Daily Cypress, which was the local newspaper at that time, reported in the 1909 salmon season there were 185 salmon boats working in Monterey Bay. 145 of them were Japanese-owned, catching an average of 1 million pounds of king salmon in 3 months. 1 million! The 1909 salmon season, they caught 1,500,000 pounds of king salmon in Monterey Bay. The next year, 1910, when this picture was taken, they caught 2 million pounds of king salmon in Monterey Bay on these little boats. That is a lot of fish. So this is where it really starts. This is a group of gentlemen known as the Japanese Association. These are businessmen who mostly associated with the wharf, mostly associated with the fishing industry here in Monterey. This gentleman right here, his name is Otto Subaru Noda. He's the guy. Otto Noda-san came to Monterey about 1896, working for the land arm of the Southern Pacific Railroad, the Pacific Improvement Company. He was sort of a labor contractor, and he also was a gatherer of wood, like a lumberjack. And he was up on a tree one day near the Monterey Wharf, looks down into the harbor, and he sees all this abalone down there. In fact, so much abalone, he literally describes it in a letter as being a carpet of abalone, and nobody is doing anything with it. And the reason nobody is doing anything with it, because nobody knew what the heck you're supposed to do with it. No, unless you're preparing abalone properly, it is kind of like eating a rubber boot. The Japanese, who have been dealing with abalone for centuries, they knew what to do with it. So the government of Japan sends this guy here, his name is Jinosuke Kadani, who was in the abalone business in the Chiba Prefecture of Japan. He comes over and goes, oh, this is great. Not only are there a lot of abalones, these abalone are big. And he sends back to Japan for abalone divers. There's a close-up of Noda-san right there. And there's Mr. Kodani, the handsome man that he was there. And Larry, you can talk about this guy right here.
Okay, this is my grandfather. He came in 1906 to work in the fishing industry. He wasn't a fisherman. He was in the fish processing business. And come to find out that there was a fishing village on Cannery Row. Used to be called Ocean View Avenue, I think it was. And in between the Murray Mansion, which is now the Monterey Plaza Hotel, and is it El Torito, the Mexican restaurant? And what's the name of that? Right now, there used to be a sculpture house. Oh, yeah. But anyway. Stoan's. Okay, so that was the site of a fishing colony, Japanese fishing colony. And on the uphill side was a warehouse. And I've been told that my grandfather let the family stayed there during the pandemic back in, early 1918. So anyway, he was involved then, and in 1926 he bought a cannery with some friends, investors, which is now the site of the Monterey Bay Aquarium open ocean exhibit. That's what I call it now. Anyway, but so that's his contribution to the fishing industry. Sea Pride Packing Corporation, and there was a picture of the Wing Chong market, I think that you had, Tim, where you'd see the other side of that bridge that goes from the processing part over to the warehouse and offices of the cannery.
So in the cannery world, the canneries are on the ocean side and the warehouses are on the other side. And once the fish have been canned, they go by conveyor belts across these things called the crossover into the warehouse. And then, of course, just by happenstance, the Southern Pacific Railroad was right behind them. So that wasn't designed that way; it just happened to work out.
Right. So you got some more pictures?
I got one more for you.
It's hard to follow Tim. Yeah.
What Larry should point out too is the fishing camp that he mentioned. So Noda in 1902, or before 1902 actually, he went down and leased that piece of property on then Ocean View Avenue, between the El Torito restaurant and the Chart House, where they want to build that marketplace thing, right? He leased that very piece of property, sent back to Japan for other fishermen to come, and created this sort of Japanese fishing colony on that site. Then in 1902, he built a cannery on that site, Monterey Fishing Canning Company. So the very first cannery on Cannery Row was Japanese-owned. It was Noda's cannery. I actually put this in here for Tony, because I thought I was going to go before you, and I was going to because this is the greatest painting, Monterey painting, in the history of Monterey paintings, in my opinion. It's a wonderful painting. It was done in 1875 by a man named Leon Trousseau, a Frenchman. This is the most amazing painting because there's so much happening in this painting. It's unbelievable. So here's the railroad coming in 1874 right there. You see two whale boats right here in the water. And look, they're towing a whale as they come in. You see the Pacific Steamship Company right here at the wharf right there. And then on the beach, you see all this whalebone that you see on the beach right here. So the whalers, Monterey whalers, were operating over on this side. And then, of course, once they processed that whale, because the smell was awful, right? They would just tow the whale out into the bay, and then the currents, being what they are, would just push the whale onto this beach here that we now call Del Monte Beach. And so now you got a beach full of dead whale. What else do you think you're going to get down there? Didn't smell very good. So big, giant grizzly bears come out of these hills, go down and the carcass of these dead whales, because grizzly bears love to eat whale. And I have read accounts of people who lived in Monterey in those days, and they said at night they hear these grizzly bears walking through their neighborhoods. So ever anybody around here complaining about raccoons getting into their garbage? Right? And then this guy in the wagon, he's got whalebone in the back of his wagon, and that's what he has there. And there was a whole industries developed around this whalebone. There are companies, little stores that were making whalebone products to sell to tourists, like three-dimensional carvings of the Carmel Mission with abalone inlays and abalone and whalebone chairs. I actually sat in one of those chairs when they weren't very comfortable, and all kinds of things. And one time, almost all the sidewalks in Monterey are made out of whalebone, and all this whalebone coming out. And the last whalebone sidewalk is just right behind us here, right over here where the Monterey Whaling Company first started, right there. I'm digressing here. So Larry, I don't know how those pictures got mixed up. But that's for Larry.
I've got a microphone here, so yeah, we can share. So this picture is the immigrants came over and they needed an outlet, and the Japanese really loved baseball. This is a picture from 1923 of a tournament in Watsonville, and they'd all get together and play baseball. But this is a picture is significant to me because I'm going to step out, or maybe I can do it from here. Oh, no, back up a little bit. So, yeah, anyway, so this is the left side of the picture is the Monterey team. And the fifth guy from the left is my dad. So this is 1923. So he was an avid baseball fan. You know, he'd follow the local teams, the Seals, in what became the Giants. And you see who's holding the trophy. You know, Monterey team. Okay. So anyway, that's one of the things that they would participate in, and Tim tells a story. Maybe you want to tell the story of how in the fishing industry there was only one union.
Yeah, so baseball is a unifying factor everywhere, right? And in Monterey, as far as I can see, is the only place where the fishermen had one union. Northern California, Southern California, all the ethnic groups really had their own separate unions. In Monterey, they had one. And I think that is primarily because Monterey is a small town. These guys all grew up together. They all went to school together. They all played together. But the real key, these boys all played baseball together. And it wasn't uncommon for these young Japanese boys to learn to speak some Italian before they learned to speak English, and those Italian boys would learn to speak some Japanese before they learned to speak English. And Monterey is the only place I found where that kind of thing happened.
My take on that is, we all learn the bad words in the other language, so we could.
So this is Jinosuke Kadani at Point Lobos. So when he began to develop the Abalone industry here, those first divers that came here, they were Ama, and they went down to Noda's camp on Cannery Row, and then Kodani kind of walked around the Monterey Peninsula, ended up in Point Lobos one day, said, hey, it looks a lot like home. And there weren't a lot of people out there at that time. And so he was able to lease this property, this part of the park, today park, from a guy named A.M. Allen who owned that property. A.M. Allen was actually a racetrack designer, and it was partners in a coal mine out there. Company wasn't producing a really good coal. It was really a low-grade coal, so they weren't making a lot of money. And so the company decided to sell off the property. Point Lobos, they actually parceled it out, and they're going to sell it out for home lots and kind of like a little town out there. But no one was buying out there. No one wanted to move out there because, it was isolated. You're away from town. I can't live out of Point Lobos. Forget it. And so so Alan thought there was something better I could do with that property, so he bought it from his partners. Then went around and bought the lots that were sold, and he actually preserved it. So you can thank A.M. Allen for Point Lobos looking the way it does today. And then he leased this part to Kodani, and watched him operate his abalone business for about a year, and then said, gee, these guys are making money. And he became Kodani's partner. So Alan was actually a pretty progressive guy for his time here. That's just a great picture of them and all that abalone shell. So there's A.M. Allen, there he is right there. And this is the cannery at Point Lobos, you see there. And what they were doing initially with the abalone is they were drying it and then shipping it back to Japan. Dried abalone in Japan is, anybody who's been to Japan probably knows this, dried abalone is very important. It's a cultural thing. It actually represents good luck, oftentimes on New Year's cards or birthday cards, wedding cards. They'll glue in strips of dried abalone. So dried abalone is very, very important. But they're also canning abalone after the turn of the 20th century there, just like they're cooking sardines. They did the same way. They steamed them in the cans at the cannery. But there wasn't a big market for canned abalone in the can. They did that mainly for Western audiences here, but there still was, no pun intended, a tough sell in Monterey, and they didn't want the canned product in Japan. They wanted the dried product. This is a photograph that shows where Noda opened his fishing camp and then eventually built his cannery there. Salmon fishermen, these are Japanese salmon fishermen in Monterey. unloading salmon. This is 1909 that you see right there. Look, that's the big guy. And then this is Ama. So we think of Ama, we think of women divers today. And in Japan, it is mostly women divers, although there are men that still do it. Here, it was mostly men that did it. We think that we believe there was one company, or there were women in Monterey for a very short period. We have a 1902 report from the Japanese government. But from time to time, they would send a representative from Japan to check up on their people in California. And this guy wrote a report about Monterey that there was one company in 1902 that was employing women divers in Monterey. It was probably with the Notice Company, I believe, if they were doing that, but we have no photographs of it, so we don't know for sure. So here's our AMA. That's what I was trying to get to. So you can see our AMA, traditional AMA gear, and we do know who these guys were. We actually have seen their passports. They arrived here about 1897 and came into the Monterey train station, and then they were taken down to Notice Camp on Cannery Row, got dressed that first morning in their traditional AMA gear, which consists of a little white cotton outfit here. Here's the abalone basket, abalone pry, a pair of goggles. Yeah, like these guys right here. And they would actually put pig's bladders on the end of these things that they would squeeze to help release the pressure. And you can see, these aren't pig's bladders, but they would have these things that do that right there. So these guys got dressed that first morning, this is about 1897, 1898, went off that beach there on Cannery Row into the Monterey Bay, jumped into the water, and about 10 seconds later, they jumped back out, and they said, Kadani-san, you didn't tell us how cold that water is. There is about a 15-degree water temperature difference between Monterey and Japan, which is actually a huge difference. So around that time, the Japanese were experimenting with the helmet gear, with the big brass helmets and the heavy canvas suits, which is far more efficient. This actually is a label from Notice Cannery, Monterey Fishing Cannon Company. This is a really rare label. Because Cannery only operated until 1907, so it only operated for 5 years. I actually found this label on eBay. eBay is the museum curator's best friend. I mean, I thought I would never see this kind of thing. And then I saw it one day on eBay, and I said, wow. And there's like a whole group of people that collect Cannery labels, and I thought, man, there's going to be a big bidding war for this thing. And so I put in a little bid, like $10, and nobody bid on it. And so I ended up with the label, which is now on exhibit at the JACL, Japanese American League Heritage Museum. And I think it was just destined for us to have it, because well, there it is. We're so happy to have it. So here is the helmet gear. Began to start helmet diving in Monterey. It was far more efficient because you could be underwater for hours at a time. This was taken very early. I can tell this is new because there are no dents on the helmet. Right, that was new. There's Kodani right here, and so you can see all the helmet gear. These guys learned to be knitters, and they would take wool sweaters and tear them apart, and they'd knit this wool underwear, put on a pair of that, then put on their clothes, then put on a big heavy canvas suit, attach 65 pounds with the lead weight to the front and back, tie lead to their shoes, bolt on the helmet, which has a hose attached to it, then go down into the Monterey Bay. In these early days, they would go down, because they would hand pump the air down to the diver. They're going down 30, 40, some cases 50 feet into the Monterey Bay. The deeper they went, the harder it was to pump. Then in the 1920s, they put air compressors on the boat, so now they're pushing the air down to the diver with a motor. So now he's going down 60, 70, 80, even up to 100 feet into the Monterey Bay. I don't know if anybody's a diver out here, but at that level, you can't stay down there very long, and you can't see anything at that level. So they kind of feel their way around. Then they work their way up very slowly to this 30-foot level, where they'd be down there all day collecting abalone. So here's another early photograph. This is again at Point Lobos. Again, look at the helmets, all nice, clean, no dents in the helmets, stuff, and you can see the hand pump right here. All these guys are Japanese, except for there's S.A.M. Allen right there, and this guy is an old Portuguese whaler right there. And so when they took over, these boats were actually old Portuguese whale boats that they converted to these abalone dive boats that they used right there. So the abalone industry is very important. By 1920, there were 9 full-time Japanese abalone companies operating off the Monterey Wharf, 9 of them. They were, 1929, the California abalone industry brought in close to $1 million in revenue, 75% of it right here in Monterey. So in my opinion, although the sardine fishery was huge, economically it was really the biggest fishery, but in my opinion, the most important, at least historically, fishery in Monterey, in my opinion, is the abalone fishery in California and in Monterey in particular. Very, very important. And I will wrap this up pretty quickly because I know we're running out of time here. So this is just one of those divers who came to Monterey. I actually took this picture in Japan. You'll see all dressed up. This is Mr. Yamaguchi here. And if you look down here, it says F.L. Swain Portraits, Monterey, California. And then here's another one. This is Mr. Kawagami. Also, same thing, F.L. Swain Portraits, Monterey, California. You notice here, he was a rice farmer and wanted to go to Monterey and be a diver, and when he got here, he hated it. But he lived here for 20 years. But he became a jewelry maker of Monterey red abalone that he was selling to the tourists. And so you can see the watch fob. That's made out of Monterey red abalone. The family still has that watch fob. And then here are the same 2 guys. Here they are right here. And then again, here's Kodani here on the boat, and you can see the hand pump. So there was a company actually in Tokyo that was producing all this gear strictly for the divers in California. They were beginning to make that wool underwear I talked about. They are making it in Tokyo and sending it strictly for the divers here in Monterey. This is just an interesting story. So because they were drawing all the abalone and shipping it to Japan, and because there was no real Western market for it at this point, people were very suspicious of the Japanese. There was a lot of anti-Japanese sentiment in the United States at this point, coming mainly from white workers who were convinced the Japanese would come in and take their job, which really wasn't the case. And so there was a lot of suspicion around this whole abalone thing. And so I actually found this from a newspaper that came out of Montgomery, Alabama, right? And this is just Yellow Spies Work Frisco. Well, what the story really is all about is it talks about the Japanese divers in Monterey Bay, and the story goes on to say they believe that they're actually not collecting abalone, but they're mapping the Monterey Bay. So the Japanese army will land at Santa Cruz and they go march on to San Francisco. This was from like 1907. Why did they do that? So there's that. And then here's the label for Point Lobos Canning Company, which they tried to market it right there. So I know I'm running out of time here because we want to do that thing. So if anybody has any questions, I appreciate it. But I want to point out one thing. We opened recently a museum at the Japanese American Civics League Hall, now a heritage center. Here, me hand that. And we have brochures for everybody. See, please come get one. And call me, and I'll open the museum up for you and come take a look at it, because we're only open on Sundays right now. Oh, yeah. But if you're interested, I'm happy to open up at any time. So if anybody has any questions, I'm happy to try to answer them. All right. This is the house in Japan. By the way, this is a shrine to Monterey. Wow. In Japan. Many little houses. This is the diver house in Japan. It came to Monterey. The guy came to Monterey in 1907. Look at these abalone shells. Those are world record size. You can take a bath in that shell. That's how big it is. It came out of Monterey 125 years ago. And that doll was purchased from Homer's department store in Pacific Road in 1927. All right.
Do the abalone taste different, the red ones and the other ones?
There are different tastes of abalone. I've been told I've eaten a lot of the red abalone, and I've eaten abalone in Japan, but I've been told that white abalone is the best. But white abalone is deep water abalone. It was pretty much fished to extinction, although they're now working to bring it back. There's a whole consortium places that are doing that now. But the red abalone is actually very good. All abalone is farm raised there. There's no commercial fishing for abalone anywhere in California today. But you can go to the wharf and have abalone dinner once you mortgage your house for it. And it's all mostly farm raised abalone, or it's coming up from Mexico, where they don't really regulate the fishery in Mexico. So it's sort of controversial. All right. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much. So we have a few more minutes before the next speaker, so we'll take a little break and we'll be back here at 4:15.